Liv, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Oh, hi there, Andy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for coming and joining us on the show. And there are a few reasons I really wanted to get you here today. I've watched from a distance you build your business and your personal brand, and you've just flourished. And it's really, really lovely to see that in the property community. I know you've branched a little bit further beyond the property community as well, but certainly a female in business, full stop, and also somebody who's done it at such a young age. Now, I know you're a real veteran when it comes to podcasting, but what I'd like to do today is just have a really open chat about perhaps your business interests, why you're so passionate about them, certainly some of the challenges that you've overcome, and where you're all going. And I know there'll be tons of inspiration here for listeners of the HMO podcast, because I know a lot of our listeners are building their own businesses. So would you mind, Liv, kicking us off by just giving us a bit of an intro about you and your businesses and where you're at now?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I started my very first business at 16. And basically, I was in high school. I was sitting my exams to get grades to either go on to university or leave school. So I sat those exams and I got like great grades. I could have went on to university to be like a lawyer, a doctor, pretty much whatever I wanted. But at that time, I knew that traditional route of more academics, more skill, more, I guess, for me, what appeared to be more rules, like was just never a path that I wanted to take. My mum had always had her own business, and she was involved in property at the time. And she had a property that was on the market for 3 months, and it wasn't selling. There was no offers. The property was empty, and people couldn't envisage how to live in that space. So I've heard of home staging in America and Canada, and this is what they do to properties to increase the value, but also make sure that it actually sells. So at that point, I thought, right, I can't see anyone in this area, never mind really the UK, that actually offers this service. So I'm going to stage it myself. So I staged that property. It then sold in 3 days above the valuation price. So at that point, realised, right, I think I'm actually onto something here. It was a massive win. And I thought, if we needed this service, then other people must need it too. And it needs to be affordable and it needs to look good, but still that, the mass market would want to do this for their property. So at 16, I went into the careers office, told them that I was not going to university. They told me I was going to ruin my life, that I was crazy. And I left school and I just started the business. A very whirlwind sort of story of that is 3 years later, by the time I was 19, I turned it into an £1 million brand.
Well, that is pretty mega. I mean, in any industry, but someone at your age, and you've been very candid about how it all started. It wasn't as if you came with tons of experience from another background that you translated into this. You kind of really built this from the ground up, which is, as a business owner, irrespective of what industry you're in, seriously impressive. So I've got tons of questions that I want to ask you about that. But first of all, I'd like to talk about the staging business and maybe pull out some insider info from somebody who really knows how to use home staging to your advantage. Because we've got a business and we've got a lot of student property, a lot of professional property, and I know you help landlords and investors with furniture and staging for that sort of stuff as well. But it's definitely one of the things that we realised quite early on, and I'm going back 4 or 5 years here, that if we used effectively, we could quite significantly increase our rents and also reduce the time that our properties were sitting on the market. Now, we don't sell much at all, although I have flipped various properties and use that very effectively there as well. But certainly when it comes to just preparing properties to go online, and even more importantly this year where we've done things like 3D videos, where we've obviously had less sort of feet on the ground with all the stuff that's going on, it's been so important to have that. But it'd be great to hear from you, and if you've got any insider information or stats on exactly how powerful it can be. But property staging, why is it so important in the industry that why should we be doing more of this?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you touched on there, Andy, that it's not just for flipping properties, but this is also for service apartments, HMOs, because I think a lot of people think that property staging, home staging, styling your home, your property is just for when you're selling it to increase that value. But actually, we see all of the properties that we stage for those other purposes, HMOs, service apartments, even long-term rental, they obviously, rent quicker and for a much higher price over the competition. I think now property staging is so vital to what we're doing in every element of property. And it's to stand out from the competition, one, because when there's a lot of people now entering into this game, as it gets more popular through social media and online, how are you going to make your property different? But also, how are you going to make your brand different? Because if you're in this for the long term, you're going to want to build a property brand. And actually, it's the quality of what you put out. And when you have that amazing portfolio of rental properties, of HMOs, and they all look great and they're of a certain quality, then you're going to get more investment, you're going to get more joint venture partners, and you're just going to have a more successful brand in general. So I think it's moved away just from even being the one deal to actually your overall brand. And I mean, what you guys do is amazing, and you've built a brand instead of just having random properties here and there that actually, they don't look high quality and they're not recognizable as yours.
I think there's so much truth in that, and we really did. And actually, it's embarrassing when I look back now what we were doing then, particularly when I compare it to and benchmark it to what we're doing now, and some of the stuff that I see other people doing, and some of the guests that come on the show, which is just incredible. And it isn't just the fabric of the property; it's not just the fixtures and the fittings and the paint. It is definitely the way that the property is staged, and it brings it to life, and it makes it very tangible. And it's definitely been an evolutionary process for us, but I think one thing that I'm particularly proud of that we did was we did recognise the importance of that in terms of brand value. And even though that's changed, and I'm almost embarrassed to show anybody what it used to look like, it was still very valuable at the time. It still grabbed people's attention, it still put us on the map, it still helped us get our brand in front of more people. So even though it isn't necessarily what I would do now, and maybe at the time with a slightly bigger budget we would have done a bit more, been a bit more elaborate, done things slightly better, just doing it was so important. And is this something that you applied to the property staging business itself from very early stage, because you've got a great brand there in itself in that package, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing when you're saying that, because when I think back to the very first house that I staged, I would be cringing to show it online now because it was so bad. It was still good enough for at the time and what was happening in the market, but now everything we do is increased by 100% quality, look, everything. But yeah, I mean, it's been so important for us from the very beginning to build a trustworthy brand, we're family run, but also something that is very professional and takes it totally out the hands of the investor, because we understand that when you're running a property business, when you have all these deals on the go, furniture and the last parts of the staging are often forgotten about. And they're often also, there's no budget put aside for them. And people are like, oh, I totally forgot about that. And you cannot, if you're in this business yourself, especially if you have a smaller team, you shouldn't be running to IKEA. You shouldn't be having 500 deliveries over 2 weeks getting delivered. You should be working with a professional company who come in, take the hassle off your hands, and it's done in 24 hours. It's
so funny that you say that, and you mentioned the blue and yellow company, because I've lost count of how many times we did that. The day before or the day of our photography and our videos, we didn't have the stuff that we needed. So staff or me were doing runs to IKEA just to get what we needed. And actually it became a big logistic headache. It was a really big problem. We didn't have any structure to it. And actually it became very, very expensive because we were repeating the process and we weren't thinking about how we could be productive and efficient in using materials again, or even how we stored them or moved them around different projects. This is actually a question that I get asked quite a lot, from people in the HMO community about, that staging and do we leave things in the house? Because I think people often get to the point where they've done their refurb or they're doing the refurb and they start planning this staging, and then they look at what they might need to stage a property, and if they want to do it themselves, there are various options, maybe sourcing all these materials, which can get very, very expensive, and also the process is very, very time consuming, and actually it's that process that I find the most difficult to manage and have actually for a long time outsourced. But where would you recommend somebody starts to live? They've got the property, they've done the refurb, and it looks great, but it could look a lot better. What are the first steps that our listeners should take?
Yeah, so I think if you are wanting to have this as sort of a full-time job where you're literally doing all what you just discussed, going to the shops, waiting in all the deliveries, it is a very challenging process. Plus, 9 out of 10 people don't have the eye for interior design, and that's actually probably been a little bit more conservative. It's probably 99% of the people don't have an eye for interior design. So really, one of the things that I really champion using a company like mine is the fact that we actually charge our client cost. So we manufacture our own furniture and we pass that exact same cost to you, what it costs us. And then we actually just take a delivery and installation fee. So we save you time. We also we stage the property, we do it all. And you're going to get it cheaper even than places like IKEA, places that, retailers, because we're manufacturing it and we're passing on that. So the first place I would start would be, if you're going to go to a company, get them to actually tell you what the property needs, because one of the biggest challenges is, one, being able to do the floor plans and working out which furniture will fit and how it fits best. If you come to a company like us, we actually design that out for you. And it makes sure that everything fits and it's all going to go to plan. Because the worst thing happens is when you get a sofa, it's too big for the room, then you need to deal with returning it. So I'd say work out what you need and then also decide what sort of look you want to go for. If it's a HMO, is it more students? And then sort of tailor your furnishings to that.
I can't tell you how many times we've done that and got it wrong, Liv. We've been trying to get sofas through the windows.
Yeah.
We've had to dismantle furniture to get it up to attic rooms because we just didn't think and plan. And actually, this stuff, when you're running a business, is so important to get right, because it's that inefficiency that really erodes the value in the business. And most businesses, particularly in the property space, operate on pretty slim margins.
Yeah.
Very rarely we're operating on 30-40% gross profit margins. So every hour that you spend doing something else is a wasted cost. So it's really interesting to hear you say that. Have you got the eye for interior design, Liv? Was that an original passion of yours, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very creative and artistic, and I've had the eye, I've got the eye, and I don't think this business particularly would have worked for me when I started it if I didn't have an eye for design, because, even to this day, most of the things we carry out now are something that I implemented in the early days of how we actually stage the house, the look. I mean, basically, when you work with us, you're buying my taste. Like, everything that we put in there is what I would choose. And it's not like in my own home, it's a bit quirkier. I choose something that's a bit more bold, but for this, I had to tailor it to, the general market. And that's one of the things that I see most often in this business, is that people come to us and they want to design their investment property like their own home. But one of the things that we have to educate them on is, you're not going to live in this. This is not for you. So we're not going to be putting what you would like in your house into this property, because you have an end client in mind. And it's almost like designing an ideal client avatar for each property.
It's funny. I do manage some properties for my parents, and my mum does like to get involved from time to time, as landlords do. And so often I have to tell you need to remember that this is not your house. It doesn't need to look like your house. It needs to look like a house for our students or for our young professionals. And getting that just right is so important, because it's very easy to be off mark with it as well, I think. actually all of a sudden you're not targeting the right demographic, or you're not quite hitting the mark with the brand, or the brand that you want to try and put into the public domain. And it's difficult. I've not got an eye for interior design, and actually I'm really fortunate because I work with some people who are absolutely incredible with it, and I take the glory for it, which is very unfair, but that's the truth. I'm better at structuring the deals and managing the costs for those things, and running projects and understanding build and development. But beyond that's really not where my strengths lie at all. Let's talk about that passion though, Liv. You've grown a business very, very quickly, and things are going well, and you've begun to expand that. But how important do you think it is for anybody who's building businesses? And Marianne, a lot of our listeners will be building property businesses. How important do you think it is that we are passionate about our businesses? Do you think people can build effective businesses if they don't have that true passion for what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because if I didn't start a home staging business, I was always going to start a business in something. But if I think back to that moment of sort of deciding this was the path I was going to take, would I have felt as passionate if I was selling, I don't know, like rulers or pens? Probably not, because it's just not where my passion lies. So I think passion is pretty much everything. And I know that the days for me when it's been super hard, like in the first few years of my business, I was working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. And pretty much every second hour of the day, you think about giving it up. You no longer want to do it. You actually think this is the hardest path I possibly could have chosen. And it's only in that moment do you really sort of tap into your love for it, and then also your why. So I think for me, it was very much connected the why with the passion. But I know that I could never get on a podcast like this and passionately talk about something if the love for it wasn't there. Like, I could not come on here and have a great podcast about football because I don't care. And I think when you're building your brand, there's going to be many opportunities like this that you have to go on. You have to impress an audience. You have to get clients. And if the passion's not coming through, then they're never going to be motivated to buy.
Yeah, and you're right. I think running a business, and actually I want to get onto this with you, but comes with so many challenges, whether it's property or not. There are lots and lots of challenges with running businesses, implementing systems that fail, things that don't go as they should do with staff, logistics, finances. There's so many things that can go wrong, and I think on those dark days in business, if you do not really get excited about the idea of what you're trying to do and create, then it's going to be very, very tough. And I do try and remind people that in property, and particularly in the HMO space, the returns are often quite attractive, and that's often why we invest in HMOs. To be honest, if they were similar to single lets, we just would manage the single lets and not worry about managing 4, 5, 6 times the number of tenants. But there are pros and cons to everything, and one of the compromises is that it is quite tough. There are lots of moving parts, but I do think you've got to be really passionate about what you're doing. And for me, that passion is actually about creating better accommodation for young people. And I love the idea of transforming these old tired buildings into something incredible. But more than that, I actually like to know that our tenants have got great homes, places that they can feel comfortable and safe, relax. And in the last year, I don't think that's ever been more important, but I think it is something that everybody building a business should keep an eye on. And I think it's easy to drift from that as well. I don't know what you think, but I think it would be very easy to start out with an idea and drift laterally, maybe to try and fit the mold, and actually the business or the idea or the kind of the underpinning of the business could actually look quite different. And sometimes that does happen in business, doesn't it? You venture away from what you originally started out to do. Has that ever been a challenge with you? Have you had to kind of rein it in and kind of refocus on your original objective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 different paths you can either go down, and it is that you're still doing your passion, but actually, you know, I love interior design, I love styling homes, I love it all. But when you start to build, you know, when you're staging 300 to 400 properties per year, which is what we now do, then it sort of moves away from, oh my God, I love this cushion, I love this piece of art, to actually, right, I need systems, I need a team, I need to do invoicing, I need to deal with all these other elements. So I think it's actually finding a nice position in the business where you still get to live your passion, you still get to do that side, and you can either outsource the other stuff or just sort of limit it what you're doing. So for me, like, I love staging. I have sort of a higher level decision maker now in terms of what's going into a property instead of actually being the one that puts the cushions out. And I also love marketing, and that's my main role in the business now. But also, I think what we're also touching on a bit here is shiny object syndrome. And I think you can so easily start your business and those elements I just described start to enter into it, things that you don't enjoy as much. And then you're at the case of, oh, well, actually, I prefer this idea. I'm just going to go and start that. And I mean, I could have switched businesses, 50 times in the space that I've built the Property Stagers. But I decided that, yes, I may add other elements into my personal brand. I may offer other things later on. But first of all, I need to make this vehicle work. And once that's running without me, then that's when I can start to look at some other things.
I think we need to caption that. I think it's actually the single biggest threat to almost every single business, certainly in the property space, and it is the shiny penny syndrome. We all get it. I get it myself. We see something, oh, that looks great, or this is a great idea that I've got, or I like what they're doing, I'm going to try that. But actually, and it's something that I've learned over the years building my business, is that the most value that we've created has come from being just persistent in what we do and consistent in what we do, delivering that message repeatedly, sharpening the blade, driving efficiency where we can, and just continuing to focus on the basics of the business. And yes, at points when the time's ready, when the cash flow is good and the staff are working well and the systems are in place, then beginning to scale beyond that. And in HMO businesses, there are so many considerations. There's so many times that you can feel pretty ground down by it, and the idea of doing something else, which might bring about a bigger win or a quicker win, is quite attractive. But actually, just refocusing, remembering what the task and the objective is, and sticking to it, will almost always yield the better results.
So yeah, I think that like when you look at people like you, Andy, or maybe me, and you're interested in getting involved in HMOs, or you're interested in getting involved in like starting a home staging company, it's really easy to look at both of us and think their job looks awesome. They look like they have tons of fun every day on social media. They post like glamorous things, but there's so much work went into the back end of that isn't you living your passion a lot of the days. It is the boring stuff until you get that team. So I think it's definitely having that sort of dedication to what you're doing, your mission. And I love that you said there, it's the persistence as well. It's the consistency. I mean, I've posted pretty much consistently every day for 5 years about staging on our Property Stagers accounts. And that's just what the audience don't see. They may show up now and think this is great, but that's been literally every single day singing from the same hymn sheet and constantly saying the same message over and over again.
Let's talk about some of the challenges then, Liv, because, and you're a great example of this actually, it's so easy to look at social media or punch your name into Google, go on YouTube, look at some of the TV stuff you've got, read the magazines, and you make it look and sound so easy. And I know from talking to you before we hit record, and I knew this would be the case anyway, but it definitely has not all been easy. And I think if we zoom in a little bit more, still, you are quite young. You're still 22 while we're recording this, which is incredibly young to achieve what you have. And also you're female in an industry, certainly when we look at the property space, which is largely dominated by men. So this must have come with a huge number of challenges. And I know that you're a great ambassador for women in business as well, and actually are doing a lot of work there. But can you tell us about some of the challenges you've had and how you've managed to overcome them?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I did start in property when I was 16. And if you've ever been to a networking event or just look at the space in general, especially if, rewind 5-6 years ago, there was very few young people involved in property. And even young guys, there just was not a lot of people, I'd say, under the age of 30 that I seen on a consistent basis. It was mainly middle-aged men who were suited and booted, and they had a wealth of experience. They'd been in property for a long time or their full life. They had corporate careers, were super successful, and it was literally me just from high school. I cut my hair actually to look older, but I had long blonde curly hair. I looked 16. And I mean, I knew what I was talking about here and there, but I really just bounced onto the scene. And I went into these events and we're trying to tell these guys that, cushions and artwork and sofas and this staging would actually make them more money. And I think at that point, there was no awareness of what home staging really was. So I was already, again, sort of like an uphill battle of actually just trying to fight the cause for home staging, never mind trying to fight the cause for hiring me to do it. And it was challenging. And I think I lied about my age a lot. So I'd always used to say I was older than I was if I got asked. It was just something I felt very insecure about. But for me, it was just getting that very first break, that very first person to say, yes, you can do it for me. And then building up that sort of bank of testimonials from there that then got more success, our brand got better known. And we went from just me to a team of 10 and actually a well-known brand. But I think it was because of that success, it built more confidence. The more confidence you have, the more success you have. So I think it was like a cycle that went round and round. So I think for anyone that maybe does feel too young, doesn't feel like they've got the experience, the portfolio, whatever that is, you need to get a little bit of success behind you. But first of all, have that confidence to start. And I hate that saying, fake it till you make it. And I like to reposition it to face it till you make it. You've literally just got to face those growing pains right at the beginning until you have the testimonials and you have the brand behind you.
Yeah. I think sometimes you've just got to work hard, work hard enough to not have to work as hard. And some of it is very tough. And was there ever a point, Liv, where you doubted yourself? Because again, looking at you right now, you're confident, you really thoroughly understand your businesses, your position in the market. And it would be easy to think that you've always had that self-confidence, that you've always believed in your objective and that you would achieve it. Is that the case? Or have there been times of doubt?
No, I mean, I think in every successful entrepreneur's life, there's always been those times of doubt. I think for me, I've always been quite good at ignoring it, especially when it's someone else's limiting beliefs. Because when I was in high school, I shared that, I was told that you're going to ruin your life. What are you doing? And at that point, it would have just been so easy to go, yes, adult, I agree with you. Let me just take a U-turn and go to university because that's the easier route. And it's so many different points. I'd say that it's a lot less my doubt in myself, but more other people's doubt, which actually then starts to sort of seep into you and make you believe it. But I've had various points in my career. One, for example, I was on an interview on the BBC. I'd just launched a charity event. I then got into a lift to go to a property event, and a woman in property came up to me in the lift and said, "Oh, you're Liv, right?" I was like, "Yeah." She went, "Don't you get too big for your boots?" Someone I didn't know, I had never heard of who they were, but they thought that I was getting too big for my boots. I was shining too bright. And I was literally I think being too successful for my age. And that's why I've written my book, Too Big for Your Boots, because that has been the one common theme throughout my journey is people doubting me, thinking I'm too young to do it, and also that they've got years ahead of me that, I should just go back to school. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but for me, I'd say it's certainly been more of a challenge to silence those voices than my own.
Business can be ruthless at times, can't it? And people can be pretty ruthless and this, and I think you do have to harden to it. But I imagine that you've probably experienced it on a different level to somebody like me still. What about the challenges of actually growing the mechanics of the business then, Liv? You built that business very, very quickly. And I know that just from the stuff that we have in stock for our own properties, that's difficult enough, keeping stock lists and making sure that staff put things where they should be and making sure that orders are done properly. but this is a whole different level for you. So how have you managed those growing pains in a business like that, where there are lots of moving parts, lots of finance requirements, lots of really quite serious decisions to be made, and consequences if things don't go right? That's a lot of pressure for a young person.
Yeah, I mean, it was massive, massive pressure. And a lot of the times it was just totally either not managed or not managed well at all. And unfortunately, I paid a lot of financial consequences of that, in terms of we had like rapid growth and revenue. We went from £30,000 to £1 million over the space of like 12 to 14 months. So that was very, very quick growth. But obviously in that time, we also had a really small team. So I was out implementing a lot of those installations. I was the one out putting the cushions in, sometimes even lifting the sofa. So there, a lot of the back end systems, the management of the team wasn't where it should be. So for me, it was a lot of backpedaling later on to get things into place where it needed to be. And I guess I'm grateful for that rapid growth. Would I have preferred it a little bit slower? Yes, so that I could, I guess I always think of it stepping into the person who I needed to become. Like, I'm certainly that person now. Like, I've learned so much, I've grown so much. But at that point that happened, I was not that person. Like, I was not who I needed to be at that point.
Going back in time, would you change anything now? Would you do some things differently?
I think I would bring in people that were better at things than me. Because I was always trying to, I guess I thought I was always pretty much the best at everything. I've got that pure perfectionist mentality. I'm working on it now, but I was like so obsessed with controlling everything that I often, like, yeah, it just didn't work out the way I wanted. And one of the questions I've asked myself, and I ask myself every day when I look at anything that I'm doing, is it that it's not done right, or is it not done by me? So I guess now I'd go back, I'd let go of that, but then I'd also pay higher salaries to bring in people more qualified than me. Because at that point, I was probably going down the route of hiring sort of cheaper, lower, like skilled people, whereas now I think I'd get some really key team players and pay the salaries.
I can relate to so much of that, Liv. Retrospect's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But I think particularly when it comes to staff, often hiring before you need to hire is key. And like many things, you get what you pay for to some extent. And if you don't get it right, managing staff can become part of your role that's growing in itself, because the business is growing, and that can actually just be an additional burden. So it's a really tricky balance. And I'm sure that there are a lot of similarities between the growth of your company and the growth of our company.
Yeah.
But I would definitely go back in time and change some of those things as well. But that's part of growing business, isn't it? How many people do we speak to that it was linear and everything just went in one direction? It doesn't happen, doesn't it? That's just not how businesses work. It's a step forwards, a step back, sometimes maybe two steps forwards and a step backwards. But it's good to hear that was the case for you as well, and it wasn't all just roses.
It's good to know you're not alone in these situations, isn't it? Because it sometimes can feel that with entrepreneurship. Like, maybe I was the only entrepreneur that made that mistake, but I mean, there's always going to be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people before you that have done the exact same thing.
Absolutely, yeah. What's the plan with it all, Liv? Because you've now got to a position where you can oversee the home staging business, and you're moving on to other things, and you're still very, very young, clearly very entrepreneurial, and it's so great to hear it kind of just oozes out of you. But where do you want to take it all? Is there a limit to this at all, or do you have an ultimate objective you want to fulfill?
Yeah, so with the Property Stagers, we're actually looking at licensing that brand throughout the UK. So currently we offer a lot of our services nationally. However, there's a few services that we would rather put through a license, like offer licensees the opportunity to use our brand, to be involved in our mission. So we're going to be looking at licensing that nationally. On a more personal level, I mean, part of the success of the Property Stagers has been down to the personal brand that I've built. And I'm a massive fan of building a personal brand. I think you can't really succeed in business these days without one, with that personal touch. And what I think it does is it gives you like an absolute world of possibilities of where you can take your brand next. So I've actually started a brand called Stager Boss, which coaches other women on how to start home staging businesses and scale them the right way, apart from the wrong way. So I guess for me, it's looking to really now empower more entrepreneurs to really achieve similar success to what I've done.
Amazing. It's amazing to hear that you've got to that level now where you can begin to focus on perhaps the next chapter for you, and I'm sure you'll go on to do some incredible things there. Liv, if you could give a single piece of advice to any of our listeners that are growing businesses of any sort, there probably will be property businesses, but if you could give them any piece of advice, just one piece of advice, what would it be? And I know I'm putting you on the spot there because you haven't been drafted on or briefed on any of these questions at all. But is there one single piece of advice that you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think for me, it's, sharing your story when no one's listening, is pointless. I think you need to be building an audience. You need to be building a community there that actually listen to what you've got to say. So I think that sharing your story, getting it out there and building that personal brand, as I've mentioned, because I truly believe that, I wouldn't be where I am today had I not actually started to share my story, not just the businesses, but my whole journey of, launching a business in school, being bullied at school, all the hardships I've overcame. I just wouldn't be there. And it's really because that is your unique sauce. Like, no one else is you. No one else has your story. And if you look at any of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, Richard Branson, he has a lot more followers, a much bigger audience than Virgin itself. So I would always look at your brand, especially if you're in property, and ask, am I known as Conlon Property Solutions or am I known as Liv Conlon? And I think one of the most powerful things you can start to do now is document your journey on social media, start to really show the you side of things rather than trying to become this corporate, faceless brand.
I could not agree more, and I think in a world where it's becoming more and more difficult to get attention because there's so much stuff being thrown at us, it's becoming more and more important that we do that. And I don't know what you think about this, but something that I'll often say to people is, don't worry so much about what you're posting or sharing. Yeah. Just post what you're doing, and you will attract the right people. You'll attract people who are interested in you or interested in your business services, and ultimately you can cultivate those relationships, you can nurture them over time, and it's amazing to see what can blossom as a result of that. You don't have to have all the solutions and things mapped out right now. Just plant that seed and let it grow. Would you kind of align yourself with that, Liv?
100%. I mean, I think the one thing that stops a lot of people is just getting started. Like, I coach so many entrepreneurs, and so many of them actually struggle with that very, very, very first step of just putting the first post out, just putting the first piece of content out. And I think, as I've mentioned, even with staging, I look back to my first staging job and it was terrible. I now look back on videos that I posted 2 years ago and they're absolutely shocking. Like, I look so nervous. I really don't talk very well. But it's that over time, I've gained so much experience. I've got a lot better at what I do. I became more prolific. And I think that's the key. It's just getting started, but it's also doing it consistently enough so you improve. And even you don't get invited on podcasts like this at the very start of your journey. But if you keep doing it consistently, doing it day in, day out, you will start to get opportunities. And it's almost like, for me, it felt like, I don't know if it felt like this for you, Andy, but one day something just clicked. Like, I started to get opportunities, but that was the hundreds of days before that I started to put in the work.
Definitely. When I feel like I'm very late to the self-brand, personal brand party. But in the last 12, 18 months while I've been growing that, it's been hugely rewarding. And the benefit, even as I was beginning it, I was probably a little skeptical about the benefits I might get from it 18 months later, they're very, very clear to me. And of course, I wish that I'd done it 18 months before. But going back to my main business and when we started building that brand, which makes me cringe a bit now. That was the seed, and just doing that was enough to get some traction, and that was enough to get us on some podcasts, and then get us some article space in the magazines, and then we built a bit of authority, and then of course some investors started contacting us, and so it wasn't perfect, but actually it didn't matter. It did the job. It got us in front of some of the right people. It allowed us to build a community of people who are interested in what we were doing, and that is the evolution, I think, of so many businesses. And I think right now we should all be doing it. I think we're categorically we should be having a focus on doing that, building our personal brand and brand presence, so that people know what we're doing. It's getting more and more difficult for people to see us, and that visibility and making sure that we're on the shelf is just so important, particularly for our listeners who are often quite interested in raising private finance, which is one of the key activities for so many of us, because investing in property is so preclusive if you don't have that finance. But if you do it well, and there's some great examples out there, and some of whom have already been on the podcast doing it, often so much of that is in the work that they've done on personal branding and branding their business and being present and building an audience. So it's great to hear you say that as well, Liv. I've got one final question I'd love to ask you, Liv.
Okay.
You spin a lot of plates, but you don't look like a plate spinner. You're someone who's very calm and collected. You've got your shit together.
Really?
How do you manage your time? Because I think time management is something for me that comes up so often. People growing businesses stuck in the chaos, and I think the ability to manage time and prioritize activities is so important. But I'm just really interested to hear how you do it. And I know that you live in fact, we haven't even mentioned it yet, but you live in Marbella. So you have a large business in the UK, which I know you have a lot of staff and assistants to run, but there are still a lot of things to do. And I'm sure that you have a whole number of jobs and tasks and priorities to address every single day. So how do you tackle that without getting overwhelmed?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I love this, because I feel like if I wasn't a home stager, or I wasn't, coaching on personal branding, I would coach on time management. Because I am a very, very productive person, and create a massive output of work each week. And really, one of my favorite books ever that I've read numerous times is Deep Work by Cal Newport. And it's really the concept that I live by. So anytime that I put in any work into my business, I will do it for no less than a 4-hour sort of time slot. So one of the things that I really believe in is waking up early. I think if you win the morning, you win the day. And if I don't wake up early, I may as well just end the day there, because I'm genuinely a morning person. So for me, I wake up at 4 a.m. every day, and I do 8 hours of work before 12 noon. And then anything that I need personal life wise, or even getting ready in the morning, it happens before 4 a.m. or after 12 noon. And for me, basically, I do a lot of tasks and projects that need that sort of uninterrupted focus time. So I will not have any notifications on, I will be uncontactable, and I'll just be sitting there focusing on what I'm doing. So I feel like unless you have those periods of deep work in your working day and your week, you won't achieve a lot of high output. So for me, it's all about those slots. And even if you don't want to do 4 hours, you can usually find at least one slot of 2 hours in your day that you totally focus in on one project.
I think that's so important to do. There are so many distractions now, and often the distractions are ones that we create for ourselves. Our phones can now tell us how much time we're spending on social media and how many times we log in and out. And it's scary when you look, and a lot of it is habit, and just switching your phone off and leaving it in a different room actually has a huge impact on your productivity. And one of the things that I like to do I'm probably not as much of a morning person as you. I'd still say I am a morning person,
Yeah.
but my days tend to start between 7 and 8. Which is still great because I get a good couple of hours in before staff are in and the phones start ringing and things like that, and emails start coming through. But I actually like to work at weekends, which I know is a bit against the grain, but in my industry, actually what that means is most of my staff, aren't working, and staff who are in tend to be getting on with their deep work because they're not getting bothered so much. And I don't find that I am distracted quite so much, and it's easier to find 4 hours in my working week on a Saturday or a Sunday that's out of everybody else's reach. I'm just left to myself, and I often like to do that in the evenings, in fact. Not necessarily a Saturday so much, but certainly on a Sunday. I do like to work on a Sunday evening. I find I get so much quiet time, so few distractions, and I can get so much done. And like you said, you like to kind of own the week, own the day in the morning. I like to kind of own the week on that Sunday evening, and that's just part of my habit that I find works so well.
Yeah, I feel like you definitely need that before you get in on a Monday. I absolutely practice the same. I'll either do like a Saturday morning or a Sunday evening, and you can just I love to always be ahead of who's working for me or with me. So I like to have, when they get into their desk on a Monday morning, that they feel super bad that I've been emailing them at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night.
I do exactly the same. My staff all wake up, all log in on a Monday morning with a good morning email, and more so now that we're still working remotely from home and stuff.
Yeah, love it.
Liv, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I bet we could just chat about property and business for hours and hours and hours. But I'm conscious we need to wrap things up. So before we do that, I know you've got a new book coming out, and I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about that, and also where people could maybe reach out, find out a little bit more about you. And also, I'm going to try and get you to perhaps do something in the roadmap, which I haven't even talked to you about. But after some of the stuff we've talked about in today's episode, I think there's some great stuff, and I'd love to maybe kind of just try and get you to do 1 or 2 things in the roadmap. But where can people find out a bit more about you, and can you tell us about the new book?
Of course, yeah. So my new book, Too Big for Your Boots, is out March 12, 2021. And basically, I feel like it sounds cheesy, but it was a book I was always destined to write, because it's the book of my journey from 16 to building an £1 million brand by age 19. And basically, it's a mix of both personal journey. So I share a little bit about my background, some of the challenges that I've overcame, the adversity that I've faced. But then the majority of the book really looks at the 6 fundamentals to building a 7-figure business. And whether that business is home staging or it's something totally different to that, these are all adaptable to whatever business you want to build and whatever sort of personal brand you want to cultivate. It's called Too Big for Your Boots, as I explained in that scenario, because I've also got a podcast, and that's what I hear most often, is that no successful person has ever got to where they are now without having faced that adversity and also other people's limiting beliefs. You can catch me on probably social media talking about it every day for the next year. You can get me on social media, Instagram, Facebook. They're all at Olivia Conlon.
And just a word of caution, guys, when you do check out a bit more of Liv, you'll feel very jealous and envious because lots of Liv's pictures are in the sun against the backdrop of a pool or the sea. Liv, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Yeah. For all our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the HMO podcast. You know that it means so much to us that you're here and that you're listening and that you're tuning in. If you could just take 30 seconds to leave a quick review, it'd mean the world to me. Everything helps, and tell everybody that you're listening to the podcast that it's live. And if you could give it a share, we'd really, really, really appreciate it. That's it from me, and we will see you in the next episode.